Welcome to an introduction to educational research. Today's video is dealing with single case or single subject research designs, and the particular group of designs we're going to talk about today are referred to as AB or an ABA or an ABAB designs. And as I've mentioned several times in different videos, true experimental research designs with their defining characteristics of one, a relatively large sample that's randomly assigned to groups, so you have experimental and control group. And the second characteristic, the manipulation of the independent variable or the treatment or the intervention by the researcher. Those two are considered the coin of the realm of research in general and educational and clinical research specifically. True experimental research designs require relatively large samples whose results are expected to generalize to a larger population from which the sample was drawn. And of course, this would be the external validity. This is a powerful characteristic of the true experimental research. However, in its scientific rigor to establish the control and the amount of the extraneous variables, it cannot account for those variables that are unique to a particular participant or participants. Those variables on an individual level cannot be controlled for. They're sort of like real-life situations. There are too many things going on. So the very characteristics that bolster true experimental research designs, the large random samples, and the rigorous control of the extraneous variables, leave a gap in the educational and clinical toolbox. Now, when a treatment is established as evidence-based, using random control trials, it is often considered as meaning that the intervention is effective with most or all individuals who participated in the study. Unfortunately, this may not always be the case. In any sample you will have, there'll be responders and non-responders. A systematic evaluation of the effects of a treatment at the individual level may be needed, especially within the context of education, regular and special ed, or clinical practice. Therefore, the utilization of a series of research designs referred to as single subject or single case experimental designs may prove helpful in identifying the optimal treatment for a specific client and in describing individual effect levels. Now, single subject research designs are a type of design with a unique feature. The sample size is usually just one or is composed of a few participants who are treated as one unit. And the participants serve both as the treatment and as the control group. And I'll explain that as we go along. I know that sounds a little confusing now. Single subject experimental designs are tailor-made for such situations where drawing large samples is impractical or where individual local effects are important and external validity is not a major concern. So this video then will go over the ABAB single case designs. So let's take a look. Now, just to ground this, on your screen you will see types of educational research, and on the left side the quantitative research methodologies, and then the research methodologies that fall under that, the experimental, and then the single case. So today we are going to be talking about the single case designs, and we're going to be talking about the ABAB design. So to reiterate, some research questions are not suitable for traditional group designs, like true experimental and quasi-experimental. The single subject research designs are most frequently applied in clinical settings with an emphasis on therapeutic impact and not on contributing to a research base or a canon of knowledge, but they're interested in therapeutic impact. These single case designs are totally capable of dealing with threats to internal validity and are acceptable substitutes for traditional group research designs. So let's take a look at then the AB set of designs. If you look at the top of the screen, you'll see the title of a hypothetical research study. So the title, The Effects of Positive Reinforcement on On-Task Behavior. Next, underneath that, is the type of research design, and in this case, it's referred to as an AB design. And by the way, the A in an AB design refers to baseline condition. So don't ask me why they labeled it A instead of B for baseline, but that's how it is. And the B in an AB design refers to the treatment or intervention or the independent variable. And you can see the independent variable is positive reinforcement, and the dependent variable, or what is being measured, is on-task behavior. So if you'll take a look at the visual down here, you see the title of the research, The Effects of Positive Reinforcement on On-Task Behavior. And in the red represents a baseline condition. The blue is the intervention or treatment or independent variable. On the bottom of your screen, on the x-axis, you will see 5, 10, 20, 30, and those are the, let's say those are the class periods that data was being collected. And the y-axis going up from 0 to 100, that's the percent of the observation time the student was on task. Okay, so let's do the baseline condition. All right, so we've taken baseline data. Now, single case research designs generally always begin with the baseline condition or the no intervention condition. And in this condition, data is collected on the dependent variable, in this case on-task behavior, generally for at least 4 or 5 data points, or until the data points stabilize in terms of their level, their trend, and their variability. So you can see in our baseline, we have 4 data points, and they have stabilized in terms of their level, which is represented by the red line, and their trend, which is represented by the green line, and their variability. The data is very stable, very stable. In fact, the on-task behaviors are down about 5% of the observation time the student was on task, not very much on task. Now, once the data have stabilized in terms of level and trend and variability, this is very, very important. It has to stabilize. Once it has stabilized, then the assumption referred to as baseline logic kicks in. Now, if the behavior being observed stabilizes in level and trend and variability, we can then assume that the behavior has reached its natural level in the environment. And if no action is taken, if nothing is done, it's going to remain exactly the same. In other words, environmental factors are maintaining or reinforcing the behavior, and the behavior will remain the same until environmental factors change somehow. When the intervention, so let's see what happens in the intervention. Okay, so when the intervention, we can see that the independent variable was introduced, positive reinforcement, and the data moved in a therapeutic direction. And on-task behavior went from a baseline level of about 5% up to about 75% of the observation time. So now the question becomes, how do we interpret this information? What can we say about positive reinforcement and its relationship to on-task behavior? Well, although these results look extremely impressive, the reality is we can't really say anything about the relationship between positive reinforcement and on-task behavior. There are way too many alternative explanations or extraneous variables that could have caused the data to move in that therapeutic direction. I mean, the student may be finally qualified for free breakfast and so has been eating breakfast at school and therefore is more able to stay on task. Or the student's sleep patterns may have stabilized. Or the student's parents may have reunited after a separation, and on and on. There could be a million different reasons. So, if you're wearing your researcher's hat, this data is useless. It has no internal validity. There are numerous extraneous variables that can offer many alternative explanations for the results. It's a very, very weak single case design. On the other hand, if you're wearing your teacher's hat, then the intervention was a total success. From the teacher's perspective, you're interested in increasing on-task behavior, and as far as your data collection went, it increased. Why the behavior changed may not be that important to you as long as the data remain in a therapeutic condition. So depending on your perspective, the design, although experimentally very, very weak, it's useless for a researcher. It may have some classroom or clinical applications. So we're going to take a look now at a more robust iteration of this design. Again, we have the same research study, the effects of positive reinforcement on on-task behavior. You can see that at the top of the screen. However, here we have an ABA design. We have an initial baseline. This is our baseline. We have an intervention. And then we have a return to baseline. This design is sometimes referred to as a withdrawal design. The intervention is withdrawn, and there is a return to the second baseline condition. Well, let's take a look at the baseline. Okay, so we've taken our baseline data, and it's stabilized in terms of level and trend and variability. So the concept of baseline logic comes into play, and we can intervene now with the treatment. So we'll intervene. The data has moved in a therapeutic direction and stabilized at about 75% of on-task behavior. So the data is sort of stabilizing here. Now we go back to the second baseline condition. So we withdrew the intervention, we withdrew the positive reinforcement, and the data has moved in a contra-therapeutic direction. And settled, and this is important, it settled at or about the initial baseline levels. So the data has settled at or about the initial baseline levels, and that's important. So the question now becomes, what can we say about the effects of positive reinforcement on on-task behavior? Well, in this case, we can say quite a lot. Since the data stabilized in terms of level and trend and variability in the first baseline condition, then moved in a therapeutic direction during the intervention phase, and then moved back to baseline levels in the second baseline condition when the intervention was withdrawn, we can say with a relatively high degree of confidence that it was the independent variable, the positive reinforcement, the intervention, that was responsible for the change in the dependent variable or on-task behavior. The process of withdrawing the intervention and going back to a second baseline condition demonstrates that there is a functional relation between positive reinforcement and on-task behavior. Now, this AB design has excellent internal validity. Excellent internal validity. By the way, no single subject or single case experimental design has any real external validity in and of itself. We cannot generalize the results to other behaviors or settings or conditions. However, external validity in terms of single subject designs can be approached by repeated replications of the study. Okay, from a researcher's and teacher's perspective, this is an excellent design. However, there is one ethical issue with this design, and that comes up with this particular design in the case of how ethical is it to leave a participant in a non-therapeutic condition. Like if we ended the design here, the participant would be in a non-therapeutic condition, be back to low levels of on-task behavior. So let's take a look at how we can combat that. Now here we have the exact same research question, the effects of positive reinforcement on on-task behavior. But this design is now an ABAB design. We have an initial baseline, an intervention, a return to baseline, and then a return to the intervention. Well, let's take a look. Initial baseline, data has stabilized in terms of level and trend and variability, so we can now intervene. Data has moved in a therapeutic direction. We go back to the second baseline, we withdraw the intervention, the data moves in a contra-therapeutic direction and stabilizes at or about the initial baseline. Now we go to treatment again, the intervention, and the data moves in a therapeutic direction and stabilizes at about the same point that it did in the first intervention. This design, like the ABA design, has excellent internal validity. And it also does not leave the participant in a non-therapeutic condition. The way this data plays out is absolutely perfect. Absolutely perfect. This has very, very strong internal validity. Excellent design. Very easy to plan and implement in a classroom. Very simple. Let's take one final look here. Now we have the same, an ABA design. Let's take baseline. Our baseline data is all over the place. It has not stabilized. Let's intervene. Data moves in a therapeutic direction. Second baseline, data does not go down. Goes down a little bit, but then goes right back up again. And the second intervention data sort of jumps around a little, goes down and then up. This is a very poor design, has very poor internal validity, very weak, because baseline data had not stabilized. Therefore, baseline logic could not kick in. So we should not, the researchers should have not even intervened here, but it should have collected some more baseline data or reconfigured the design. So this is an example of a ABAB design that is very, very poorly planned and carried out. Just showing that in terms of contrast. Okay, so the advantages and disadvantages. Withdrawal designs such as the ABA and ABAB provide a high degree of experimental control or internal validity while being relatively straightforward, very easy to plan and implement. And they can represent one of the strongest treatment effect demonstration strategies. They are easy to plan, as I've said, and implement, making them very useful in classrooms and clinical settings. A disadvantage is a major assumption of the ABAB design is that the independent variable being targeted is reversible. It'll return to baseline levels when the intervention is withdrawn. This may not be the case with learned behaviors. Suppose you wanted to teach a student single-digit multiplication facts. using positive reinforcement. Well, once the student learned those multiplication facts, they're not going to unlearn them when you withdraw the treatment. So one of the disadvantages is this design is only useful for behaviors that can be reversed. The other point about this design is that, well, actually, let me restate it. Another disadvantage of this design is, suppose you have a student who is a headbanger, bangs his head against the wall. Well, if you introduce an intervention that stops the student's headbanging, you're certainly not going to withdraw the intervention and have the student go back to headbanging just so that you can demonstrate internal validity. So there may be some ethical issues here also. But again, the ABA and ABAB designs are excellent and, again, easy to implement and put into use in classrooms and clinics. Okay, well, now here's an assignment for you. Using the internet or appropriate textbooks and research articles, look up the various differential reinforcement strategies. I think there are 3 or 4 of them. Differential reinforcement of incompatible behavior, differential reinforcement of other behaviors, and a couple of others. And I want you to write a narrative describing the strategies and how they are used to change behavior and how they might be used in a classroom setting. Then I'd like you to develop a hypothetical research study using one of the differential reinforcement strategies you researched to increase appropriate eye contact in a 7-year-old student with autism. Put this research study into an ABAB design. Create dummy data. That means you make up the data. Create a graph using your made-up data. Structure your data so that the study has excellent internal validity. Give an example as to why it has excellent internal validity. And make sure to include the research title, the independent and the dependent variables. And then next, I want you to develop another ABAB design using hypothetical data and have the independent variable be a different reinforcement strategy, different differential reinforcement strategy than you used in your first example. Now, this information is contained in a worksheet, which I should have mailed to you already. So it should have accompanied the assignment. And if you did not receive it, then please email, let me know, and I'll get it to you as soon as possible. Well, that's your assignment. And here are the resources used in the video. And thank you very much. And we'll see you next time.